that I've been doing for the past, I don't know, 10 years or so, long before it was cool, was recording all of my classes, initially wearing a wireless microphone and collecting MP3 files, and nowadays using more high-tech options. So if you're not able to come to class, or if you just want to hear any part of it again, there will be a video recording of class. The way that I have it situated, though, is that I have dual monitors. So your faces are on the monitor that's on my laptop that I'm looking at right now. There is a separate monitor that is capturing the recording. So none of your faces will be part of the recording, which is why I can put it on YouTube, but it does capture the audio. That way, if you ask questions, then the folks who would be listening to the videos can hear the questions as well. And if you're one of those folks who is shy, doesn't want to talk, or doesn't have a microphone, you can always use the chat window to communicate with me. And if you're extra shy and you don't want anyone else to see your questions, then you can send chat messages directly to only me, and I can repeat them and answer them. So that's probably my favorite thing about this whole Zoom experience, is that one feature of folks being able to communicate semi-anonymously, at least from the perspective of the class. So this is our course website. This is where everything is going to be in terms of your materials for each week. And this is where the videos will be posted for each of the recordings. You will see that I have already posted several videos that I made last semester focused on introducing you to the University of Iowa virtual desktop. So you all have been here for maybe a semester at least. Have you had a chance to play with that before? The virtual desktop? Couple no's, couple yeses. There's a learning curve associated with it. Yes, okay, good. The good news is that it makes it so that you can access all different kinds of software for free wherever you are. The bad news is that it does take a bit to get used to the system and to working with files inside the system, particularly if you use a Mac. There seems to be an extra layer of difficulty in getting the file names and the paths exactly right. And so I have tried to anticipate those difficulties and created a couple of handouts as well as videos walking you through the system. Because in this class, we are going to learn how to use software in order to do analyses. So I'm going to ask that you pledge allegiance to either the program Spss or the program Stata. And we'll talk more about those in the lecture, but that's what these videos refer to. Otherwise, this web page is going to have the most current version of whatever's going on. So not R is a question. I am learning R. So I have resisted as long as I possibly could, but this is the semester that I'm going to learn R. I'm not a fan so far. My husband is a super R user and he keeps telling me, it'll get better, it'll get better. And it hasn't gotten better yet, but I'm learning it, and so I can help in that regard to decipher code and to point you towards things, but I wasn't planning on adding examples for R for this class in particular. I'm doing it for some of my advanced classes. Question. Let's see, SPSS. SPSS is a lovely little program. Unfortunately, it doesn't have all of the features that I need for this class, and it doesn't have as much room to grow in terms of advanced models as some of the other programs. The analogy that I use for SPSS is like the hardware section at Walmart. Right? There's like 2 or 3 aisles. If you just need a hammer, you can go pick it up and it's just fine. If you just need to get descriptive information or to examine simple correlations or something like that, SPSS is fine. But Spss, R, and Stata and packages like that are more like Home Depot. They have everything. And because they have everything, they can be harder to figure out what you need to do, like which aisle, this particular type of screw bit is in, and that's my job. I'm here to help that translational process. So I'm very familiar with SPSS. I can help with it, but it's not something I've chosen to emphasize. Same thing with R. Do I have a preference between Spss and Stata? Yes, I do. I've got some slides on that. Each is good in its own way. In terms of the type of research data that you're going to be working with, though, one may be more useful, directly useful to you than the other. And I've got a link here that the virtual desktop link is not working. Let me see if I can figure out why that is. Did they change it? Okay. doing a live demo, pulling up a web page. Okay, it's working for me.
No, it's the link to your PDF document that has the instructions.
Oh, that link. Yes, well, that is my fault entirely. I can fix that. Let me see here. This one. Yes, okay. I will fix that as soon as we're done here. Thank you for letting me know. And we need to be logged in with the VPN, yes. So in order to actually access the University of Iowa virtual desktop, you have to be connected to the VPN system. And that's actually one of the steps that's included in the Getting Started handout that is not yet available. But I promise I will fix that as soon as we're done. So I like all the questions so far. Thank you, folks. I do encourage questions, comments at any point. Don't feel like you would ever be interrupting me. If I didn't want to talk to you, I would do this asynchronously, right? I'd just sit in my basement and record lectures, and I'd encourage questions, not live. I would encourage them after you've had a chance to digest it. But I feel like this type of material in particular, it's real easy to get lost if you miss something early on that everything else builds on. So I want you to feel free to stop at any point and ask for clarifications, ask me to repeat things, ask me to rephrase things, and also ask me to slow down. This is the time of day where the cups of coffee throughout the morning and my afternoon diet Mountain Dew starts to kick in. So if you feel like I'm getting a little manic, just let me know and I'll try to back it down. So, cheers. I swear this is just caffeine. There's nothing more interesting in here. But the straw I have discovered is a hack so that I can actually drink with the microphone on. So, yeah, I know I look a little nerdy with the microphone, but I'm told that the wired connection makes it sound better than the wireless. And so, since communication is at a premium, I figure I'll sacrifice because I'm a giant nerd as it is. All right, where was I going with this? Ah, yes, I was going to say this syllabus will get updated every day throughout the semester. If due dates change, I will announce it in class and I will send an email. Due dates may change if a topic takes longer than I had anticipated. I want to make it so that every time something is due, you have at least a week after whatever we've covered to be able to complete the work that is due. If it looks like we're behind and I need to push the due date back, I will do so. I will never make anything due sooner. That I will promise you. I may end up pushing due dates back a little bit. So let me describe what we're going to do a little more let's say less rambly. Can we go with that? And switch to lecture 0. So we're starting at 0 because I have a system in this class by which I have a lecture and I have an example or two, and then you'll have a homework that is related to that. And so to keep all of the numbers in sync, I've named this one lecture 0. Let me move this control-y thing out of the way and get this to the full screen. All right, can you all see what I'm looking at? Are we good? Any questions or comments or anything I missed in the chat window before we dive in? No? Okay. So what to expect? Reasons why you might be here. I'm betting there's at least some of you who are here because you have to be, and that is the end of the sentence. If that describes you, I am totally fine with that. I realize that not everyone grows up to want to become a quantitative methodologist. There may be some of you who are very well versed in qualitative methods and they work just fine for you, and you're here because you have to be, and that's fine with me. I hope to change your mind though. I'm not going to lie. I am going to be putting the hardcore press to get you to come over to the dark side because it's really not that bad. What I want to teach you about this semester is not statistics. I don't want you walking away with formulae and ideas and math and wondering what the hell it had to do with anything that happens in the rest of your life. I don't want that for you. What I want for you is to begin to become fluent on the pathway to fluency in quantitative methods, which is what I specialize in. It's what I'm passionate about. My background training is actually in psychology, and I have taught as a faculty member at 3 different universities in 3 different departments, and quantitative methods is a common language that we can all speak. It's the idea that we can use quantitative data and we can combine that with statistical models, applied math, in order to be able to answer research questions and address real life issues. That's what I want you to be able to get on the pathway to being able to do. So, in terms of a hierarchy of knowledge, I just want to point out sort of where we are and where you could eventually go. So, people who have little background in quantitative methods, which is what I'm assuming since you're in this class, you can pick up 2 or 3 classes in quantitative methods and design and methodology broadly construed to meet your program requirements. And a reasonable end goal of that would be to be what I call a competent consumer, to be able to read research in your field that's using quantitative methods, recognize some of the vocabulary, have a general sense of being able to follow what they're doing, not necessarily pick it apart, but be able to digest it. If you're willing to keep going, if you have the bandwidth and the desire, or someone else thinks it's good for you, either way, then you can pick up some more courses. And at this point, you may have the capacity to do your own quantitative analyses, such as in research projects. If you really want to keep going, one of the things that you can do at Iowa is to piggyback your primary PhD degree with a master's. So there are students who like this stuff so much, or they find it useful and they keep taking classes, that they eventually earn themselves a master's degree in measurement and statistics. That is an option for any of you to think about. And if you were to keep going, then you could actually end up with a specialization in quantitative methods, which is what the PhD in ed measurement and stats is about. Or you could be good enough, so to speak, to become what people call a twofer, which sounds sort of like a negative thing, but I have seen more and more job ads written this way across different programs. For instance, in psychology, I've seen job ads at the University of Kansas and other places that say, we want someone who can contribute to any of the areas in psychology, but also teach our quantitative methods courses. I've seen ads that look like that in sociology, education, psychology, and a lot of other social sciences. So if you can get to the point where you can pitch yourself as having that expertise, that's going to open more doors for you in terms of careers, not just academic, but in research settings more general. So I just want you to be open to the possibility that this could become a new skill set for you that is directly marketable. So what are we doing? Applied math, not statistics. We're going to focus on logic. The thing that makes this material challenging is not the math. You're not going to be doing the math. You're going to ask the computer to do the math. Computers are better at it. They're faster. They make fewer errors and they never get it wrong. Our job is to know what to tell the computer to do. The logic that follows this process is very straightforward, at least in the beginning. If this, then that. That's what we're going to focus on. So what are we not going to do this semester? We are not going to calculate things by hand. With very, very few exceptions, every number that I'm going to ask you to come up with will be the result of a program spitting out that number for you. We're not going to derive things. We're not going to prove things. Each of us has, yes, I like the celebration from Alex, yes, agreed. It's okay to trust the mathematicians and hardcore statisticians who came up with this shit, okay? It's fine to trust them. They got it right. Our job is to figure out when to apply it. And for the same reason that we're going to be using computers to do the heavy lifting for us, you don't have to memorize formulas. It's not required. If you can learn the vocabulary and learn the logic, then you can look up the formulas if you ever were to need them, or you can look up the routines that have the formulas programmed in. That's what we're going to be focusing on. So it's going to be all about language. Even though this is a math class on the surface, it really is a course in language because we're learning vocabulary words. We're going to be learning notation to convey the ideas in equations. We're going to have equations. You don't have to memorize them, but we're going to have them. And then we have to learn the language to tell SAS, Stata, R, SPSS, etc., what to do. So there actually is a lot of working memory involved in keeping track of the language aspect of this, but it's not going to be the math. So what am I going to do? We're not having tests. The end. I don't believe in them. I don't believe that in your life there will ever be a situation where you have to sit in a room and you have to know it right now or else. That's not a thing that's going to show up in your careers. If you are in that situation, you will have prepared for it and you will know exactly what is being asked of you. Like if you're in a defense or if you have to give a big talk, like a job talk or something, you will be prepared and it's a very different animal. I'm not going to ask you to do practice problems. I'm not going to ask you to do things by hand that the computer can do for you faster and better. And I'm going to try to make connections between things as much as possible in terms of matching questions, designs, ideas, and then the logic of statistical methods. What we are going to do in terms of the work that you can expect to do for this class, I have two types of activities planned. One of these is formative assessments. So these are 6 different ones. It's going to be about every third week or so. 2 points for completing each of 6 of them. And the idea is that you're going to log into Icon, see 2 or 3 or 4 questions that are just general review questions. What does this mean? What are the 3 ways of this? What are the 2 ways of thinking about this definition? That kind of stuff. And they shouldn't take long. They should be things that you can answer off the top of your head or close to it. Like we're looking at that sort of level. And if you find that you don't know the answer, then that's something that you will need to review. So the idea of the formative assessments is to provide an opportunity for structured review for you. And then also on my end, they will be due in most cases on Monday nights when they're due is what I have planned. If it won't be a Monday, it'll be a Wednesday. That way I can look at your answers the next morning and see if there's any common misconceptions or things that I want to go back over or say more about. So it's a checkpoint that goes both ways is the idea. I will give you the 2 points if you make an honest effort. You don't have to have it right. And you can leave me notes in there that say things like, I'm still confused about this, Lisa. Can we talk more about X? And I'll say, great, because that's the purpose of this. So if you do it, you get your points. The other thing that you get to do is homework. Since I'm not doing tests, I want to give you an opportunity to practice what we're going to be talking about and hopefully learning. So I have not turned it on for this class yet. I'm waiting to see if there's any late adds or drops. But starting next week, I will give you a chance to learn about my online homework system. So have any of you heard of this before from classmates or otherwise? No? Okay, one Alex has. Have you heard good things or bad things? Or mixed?
Mainly good, generally good things. I guess my question about it is this one, because I'm not sure I understand, is this one where like you have to get it right to get all of the points? And is there like much leeway to ask questions? I guess I'm not entirely sure how it works.
Okay, yes. Thanks for the questions. You will get a chance to do what I call homework 0 first, which is an opportunity to earn 3 points of extra credit right off the bat. That will get you acquainted with the system and how it works. And I have a video up already demonstrating that. I just have to turn on the system for y'all. In this homework system, there are 2 kinds of questions. There are computational questions and there are interpretational results type questions. For the former, it'll ask you to find a value of some kind. So what is the mean of this variable, for instance, right? You ask Spss or Stata to spit that out, you enter the number. If the number is correct, it turns green. If the number is incorrect, the box around it turns red. And you keep trying until it's green. I don't care how many times it takes, and I don't keep track of how many times it takes. I want you to know that you are on the right track, that you have asked the computer to successfully provide the right information for you. And so this is a chance to practice vocabulary because I might not always say, give me the mean. I might say, give me the most likely value for the sample or something. And then you're like, oh, wait, that's the mode. That's the number I need in here. So it works both ways. So for those, you know immediately if you're correct. And if you don't have it right, then yes, you absolutely can ask for help. And students have found in the past that working in groups or working together on these can be helpful. I'm fine with you all working together so long as each of you can do it by the time it's over. What I don't want to happen is sort of what can devolve in group work where one person sort of does it all and the other people kind of piggyback. That won't help you in your lives. So I don't like that sort of group work, but I'm assuming that you all are grown-ups, you're all invested in your education, and that I don't have to police you like your undergrads. I'm not into policing. So those are the questions you get immediate feedback on. The other type of question you don't get feedback on immediately, but it's a multiple choice question. So what it will look like will be either multiple choice questions asking about the results that you just found, or they will be what looks like Mad Libs. Do you all know what Mad Libs looks like? Am I dating myself here? Okay, a few people don't. Mad Libs is a child's sort of, I wouldn't say game, but activity where someone asks you, give me a verb, give me a noun, give me an adjective, and you have to say it without knowing what you're referring to, and then they plug it into the sentence, and it's sometimes hilarious. It's going to be the same sort of idea as that, where there'll be a drop-down menu, and you get to make one choice. For instance, this correlation is either significantly positive, non-significantly positive, significantly negative, or non-significantly negative. Like, so how would you talk about this in practice in relation to the information that you entered up above? And so it's a finite set of choices. You don't get a chance to see if you're right until after you turn it in, though. Hopefully we aren't too hilarious with these Mad Libs. No, I'm not that funny when it comes to the homeworks. There's not a lot of room for humor. I try to be as funny as I can in this atmosphere, which it's like stat funny. Like, you know how you can be like work hot, you know, like not really hot, but like on a scale of like relative to your coworkers, you can be work hot. I'm stat funny. That's what I am. Like relative to the going rate for my profession, I'm, a stand-up comedian, but no. The Mad Libs will not be very funny. But hopefully they will be useful. So my intention with this is actually to teach you how to write results sections. Because when it comes down to it, results sections for quantitative methods are formulaic. I literally can get the computer to do it because you talk about things in a very consistent way using a common set of vocabulary. And so my hope is that by completing the blanks in the homework, you can take this with you as a template for what it would look like to submit a results section with that type of methodology. That's the goal. I want you to ask for help. So I learned a rule back when I was in these classes from my professor, Cal Garvin at the University of Nebraska. I took a bunch of classes from him when I was an undergraduate there, and he had what he called the 15-minute rule. Like if you have banged your head against something for 15 minutes and it isn't working, you need to stop. You need to shut it down and ask for help because that's the point of diminishing returns. And I feel the same way. If you get stuck on a problem, you can send me an email that says, I'm stuck on number 65. Here's what I think it is, but the homework says it's wrong. And I can usually troubleshoot very quickly because if there's a mistake to be made, I have made it before. And we can smell our own. So I'm familiar with the different ways that this can go wrong, and I can help you get back on the right track. So you shouldn't feel like you're bothering me if you want to ask questions about homework or anything else. So 88 points for completing those. I do take off a point though if you turned it in late. So these are hard deadlines. It used to be 3 points pre-pandemic, but given all of the uncertainty right now, I didn't want to be overly punitive, but I do want to give you a tangible reason to keep up because these things are cumulative. And if you get behind, it can get hard to dig yourself out of that hole. So each homework assignment has a hard due date. It'll be 1 point off if you don't submit on time, no matter how late it is. But you get 3 points for doing the extra credit to test the system. So that works out to, you can turn half of them in late and it's fine. So I found in the past semester or two that worked pretty well, that most people were able to keep up just with having that minor incentive to stay on task. Okay, did that answer your question, Alex? Yes. Are you on a treadmill by chance? Is that what's going on?
Yeah, so I really don't have an official office anymore, but there's this laundry/storage room in the CDD. So Matt said I can just hang out in here until someone tells me I can't. So I figured I'd, work toward my 10,000 steps. So here I am. I'm gonna, attempt to keep it so I'm not perspiring, but we'll see.
No judgment on that. Hey, good for you. The treadmill desk thing, it sounds like a great idea so long as you can wear comfortable shoes, right? Like if you're in work shoes with no arch support, that is just not a good idea. I know people are into the standing desks. I haven't gotten there. I worked too many crappy jobs as a teenager and in college where I had to stand all day. One of the reasons I got my PhD is to earn the right to sit the hell down, right? That's the way I look at it. I'm going to sit down. I'm not going to wear a name tag. I have made it this far. So I'm just going to sit here with my bad posture in my comfy chair with my slippers on, as it were, because, this is Zoom University we're talking about and make it work. But good for you. Good for you. Yeah, I mean, like I see some folks are having lunch, other folks, I don't know what's going on. I have been known to give myself a manicure during faculty meetings with my camera off. I'm really not going to be offended if I see you doing other things to try and keep your lives moving along, particularly eating lunch since the time is scheduled this way. So it's all good. I'm rambling again. Let me pause, reload, and see if there's any other questions.
So clarification, the computation portion of homework can be edited
Hmm?
until the system says you're right.
Yep.
Interpretations will be graded later on, and all that will be accumulated to be 88 points total.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank
it's
you.
out of 100. So I'm trying to keep it easy. So 88 points out of 100 comes from completing these. And once the due date has passed, if you've turned it in on time, you will be able to see what the right answer would have been if you get it incorrect. So you'll see your answer and it'll be in red font, and then the right answer will be in green font. And then you can ask me, or we can go over it in class if everybody turns it in on time. We can go over the answers together, or you can ask me, hey, why did I get this wrong? And that's actually very helpful because sometimes the answer is, it's not wrong. I made a mistake in the answer key. So that happens occasionally too. So, all right.
On average, how would you say students do with this? And I only ask because stats didn't go so well last semester, and I'm a little worried, so I'm going to do the work. I'm just curious on average how folks generally fare with this system.
This is my 4th time teaching this class with this system. I use the system for all my classes, at least to some extent. I have never failed anyone. I don't want you to fail. I want to give out A pluses to every single one of you. That is my objective. You will earn them. I don't want to tell you how many total questions you're going to answer because it's going to be demoralizing at this point, but by the end of the semester, you will feel good about everything that you have done. And there's enough questions to where if you miss one, it's a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percent, and it's not going to be a big deal. So, what I want to convey here is it's going to be okay. Statistics is one of those things where people either love it or hate it. It seems like there's not a middle ground. It's one of those careers where, when I'm on the airplane and someone says, "Oh, what do you do for a living?" It's like, I'm a professor and I know what's coming, right? Because when I tell them what I teach, there's like, "Oh, I had to take stats and I hated it." Like, everyone has that opinion. It's the reasons that you would hate it, I am trying my darndest to avoid. I want you to see this as a skill set that makes you employable, that makes you better at whatever you came here to do in terms of research, in terms of teaching, in terms of professional development. And I honestly believe that it is worth your while to acquire these skills and that everybody can do it. I truly, honestly believe that. And my job is to be the conduit to make that happen. Question: did I create the system myself? Ish. So the idea for the system originated with Cal Garvin at the University of Nebraska. He hired a master's student who wrote the initial version of this as his thesis. He was in computer science. So I co-opted him and I had him help me write the shell that adds the result sections and things like that. And so since then, I've added components to it. So it's different than what it was, but that was the original place where it began. One of the aspects of it that I want you to be aware of is that each of you has a different data set that you'll be working with for each assignment. I use your 8-digit ID number as a random seed. So I will have the same story that generates a data set with the same structure, but each of you will have a different right answer and potentially then a different conclusion based on your answer than other folks. And so if you work together on these problems, you'll each have to run the same code on your data sets to be able to generate the correct answers. All right. So how are we feeling in terms of anxiety? You feeling like you can do this? Like it's going to be maybe not as terrible? Not as terrible is what I'm going for.
I think that's manageable. I guess my main thing was like, if I miss a question, I just see the grade and thus my GPA in future just, so glad that's not the case.
No, it's not going to happen. The only way that you can fail is if you don't do it, right? Like if you don't do the work, then I can't help you. But if you do the work and you need help, then that's my job, right? To help you get to where you need to go. And in terms of what I'm going to ask you to do, I'm not asking you to do anything that I haven't shown you exactly how to do it with an example already. What I'm going to be asking you to do is to take my example and to adapt it, change the variable names, change the specifics to be able to answer the questions. I don't want you trying to go to Google University to track down our code to do whatever because I didn't show you what to do. Like, that's not fair. So I think you'll find these assignments to be very doable because I don't think it's fair to turn you loose on the internet to make you find the solutions yourself. Okay, slide 5, and it's 1:05. Making good progress here. Can you tell I haven't had many conversations over break? I'm a little excited to be in front of students again, so thank you for coming and letting me talk. So my job is to provide materials to you, so custom lectures and examples. I will give you all of the data, code, and results that go with the examples so that you have those raw materials to start from in doing your homework. My job is to answer your questions. So I would prefer it if you ask your questions during class. You can do so anonymously if that's a thing. That way everyone can hear the answers, because odds are good someone else has the same question or could benefit from the review. And if you ask a question that someone else already knows the answer to, then you have made their day. Because then they're like, hey, I know what's going on. I followed that. And you can feel good about that. So there is no bad question here. Office hours. So office hours are from 3:15 to 4:45 in this same Zoom room on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So right after my next class gets out, I have a class at 2 o'clock as well. And the format is this. You show up and I answer questions in the order in which people show up. People have found it helpful to work on their assignments during office hours to build that into their schedule, and they just hang out in the background. And if you get stuck, then you raise your hand and I help you, and then you go back to working again, and you get stuck and raise your hand and I help you, and you go back. So the group-based office hours is my way of trying to make sure that all my students can get my attention in a timely fashion. There's only 9 of you in this class, but the other class is 31. So that's big for a graduate class. So that's my compromise. If you want to talk to me one-on-one, we can set up a time to do that as well. That's fine. Just know that I am booked from 12:15 through 5 o'clock on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but other than that, I have pretty good flexibility to be able to set meetings. Your job is to ask questions, to review as frequently as you can. So drilling vocabulary, drilling notation, things like that, building up an automaticity of the material to where you don't have to stop and think, okay, what's that again? Because that break in the logic will slow you down. So building up a facility with the material will help. Practicing. So I'm going to give you canned data sets to practice with, but if you're involved in research or your advisor has research that you can get involved with where you can practice this stuff on data that you care about, that's going to be the most important thing to help you. There is a magic that happens when you have to translate these abstract ideas into your specific situation. And if you have data that you want to ask about in class, like if I say something and it reminds you of something you're working on or that you've heard about, absolutely ask those questions. I love those sorts of questions because then we can generalize past just one specific example into research more generally. The textbooks. So I gave you a textbook in Icon, and there's another one that I recommend if you want to become a heavy-duty Stata user. If that's not on your wish list, then you don't need it. I'm going to be honest, I don't love the book. I hated it least of all the books that I looked at, and so I settled on it, but I don't love it. So I don't follow it. I think it's the way that some of the material is presented is somewhat antiquated and siloed, meaning it's very like this is this and this is this, and there's not the connection between the two that I want you to have. So you don't have to read if you don't want to. I'm just putting that out there. If it helps you, great. If it doesn't, then so be it. And if you're looking for extra things to read, like if you want more about particular topics that I sort of wave my hands about, please ask me. I'm happy to suggest other sources for you as well. And then don't wait till the last minute to start homework is the other thing. What students have told me and what I have seen is that literally getting Spss and Stata to start up and understand where your data are is the hardest part of the entire process. Seriously, just battling with the software initially to get started is harder than doing the work. So get that part over with as soon as you can when a homework is open, and then that way you'll be able to complete it. If you wait till the last minute and you might not even be able to read in your data, then you're going to be stuck. So let me help you as soon as you're able to do so. All right, software. So we talked a little bit about this. There's 1,000,001 software packages out there. I have chosen to feature Spss and Stata. How many of you are from EPLS? About half of you. Okay. EPLS folks value Stata tremendously. That seems to be the going package amongst the faculty and students that I've seen. So if you are from that department, I would probably recommend that you pledge allegiance to Stata. Spss is something that I wasn't taught initially. I grew up on SPSS in undergrad and I picked up a little bit of Spss in grad school, but then I got to really love it because of its capacity to automate tasks. For instance, the homework system is a Spss program. The Spss program writes all the data, it codes all the answers, it writes all the web pages that are involved, it does everything. So Spss is a very powerful language, just like R supposedly is, although I have not signed up to drink that Kool-Aid in its entirety. In terms of considering which one would work for you other ways, learn both. So I'm going to show you how to do everything in both packages. You can either tune me out when it's the one you're not working in, or you can take this opportunity to learn both. And any software package that you learn for statistics or for any other part of research goes in your CV, by the way. If you don't have this already, build yourself a technical skills section or a heading, something along those lines, and every software package that you can use goes in there. I've been seeing advertisements for summer internships for testing companies and things that come through the Ed Measurement and Stat listserv, and most of them list as a requirement for your application that you know how to use certain packages. So this is your chance to add to that list. The one thing that used to matter that doesn't currently, it used to be the case pre-pandemic that Stata was not available from off-campus. And so for that reason, some folks picked up Spss because they knew they could get it from home. Since the pandemic hit, Stata is available from off campus, and so that isn't a deciding factor anymore. There are multiple ways to access these programs. The University Virtual Desktop is one that is general enough to where you can log in from anywhere and work on it so long as you're able to get a VPN connection. You also have the Research Remote Desktop is a university service, and this information is in the syllabus, by the way, that you can sign up for, and that works exactly like Remote Desktop. So it looks like you're just using a regular Windows desktop, and you can run Spss and Stata from there. And if these things are too much of a headache and or you have an internet connection that is not reliable enough, you can throw money at the problem. So I had a few students who decided to throw money at the problem. They got themselves a 6-month data license, which is $48. You can do that too. So whatever it takes. And these are the other programs that I can help you in. In terms of my take on these packages, here are just some pros and cons I've found in working with them. If you want to talk to me about the type of data that you'll be working with and the kind of research that you'll be involved with, I'm happy to speak with you about that, but this is just my 2 cents on which program is better for which thing. SPSS does not have everything I need for this class, and that's why I'm not going to be adding that to the list. And R is not friendly. R is super flexible and it's intuitive if you already have a computer programming background. If you are new to this, R is a steep hill to climb. So like I said, I'm learning to climb it, but I'm not going to teach it in this particular class. All right, so this semester, what are we going to be working on? Can I get a survey? How many of you have had some sort of intro stat course in your lifetime before? Okay, it looks like most everybody-ish. Maybe long enough ago. Is that what that face means? Like it was 20 years ago. If that does that count? Is that what you're thinking? Yeah. Well, if you've heard it before, then in theory it should come back sooner than if you'd never heard it. So why I say that is the first 3 bullets here are going to sound awful familiar if you've had an intro stat course before. What we're starting with today is terminology and talking a little bit about sampling design so that I can set you up to know what you will be able to do with this class and what this class won't teach you. Univariate descriptive statistics, mean, variance, skewness, that kind of stuff is next. And I'm going to use that as a way to get you started in the software, to be able to get the software to spit out those sorts of things for you. Bivariate measures of association, so things like chi-square, Pearson correlation, Spearman correlation, that kind of stuff. I'm guessing if you've had an intro stat course, you probably would have seen all of that before. Maybe not necessarily in software, but at least the concepts. From there, though, the course begins to take a modeling turn. So we're going to be focusing on what I'm going to call the general linear model, which is a system for predicting outcomes that are numbers, so quantitative variables, from any kind of predictor. And it's one overarching umbrella under which different sub-combinations have different names. So for instance, if you have a numeric predictor of a numeric outcome, that would typically be called regression. If it's one predictor, that's simple regression, which is so patronizing, right? Like it's simple. I hate it when I read books and they tell me something is simple or obvious or clearly, right? Don't do that to your readers. That's not a good strategy. But yeah, that's what they call it. It's simple regression as opposed to multiple regression, which is what it is when you have multiple predictors. We're going to do that. If you have a predictor that is a kind, a category, like group 1, 2, or 3, type A, B, C, that kind of thing, then that combination is referred to as analysis of variance, or ANOVA. If you have both kinds, numeric predictors and categorical predictors, that is known as ANCOVA, or analysis of covariance. So we're going to do all of those different things under one umbrella because they really are the same thing. And the last bullet here, if time permits, which it did last semester, so I'm hopeful it will this semester as well, we're going to learn how to test moderation. So moderation is the idea that a relationship between 2 variables doesn't necessarily apply to all kinds of people, or it applies differently. So is the relationship between, say, education and future earnings the same for men as it is for women? Is the effect of spending more time in class the same for people who've taken stats before as it is for people who haven't? Like those sorts of questions. Does this matter still in this case? That's the idea of moderation. And so that's where we're going to end up at the end of the semester, adding what's known as interaction terms to the models to be able to answer those questions. So that's what we're going to do if anyone asks you, what's this class about? And it's okay with me if most of these words mean nothing to you at this point. That is totally fine, because you'll be able to look back at this in May and think, huh, I know what these words are now. Cool. All right, so moving forward. Before we move forward, let me pause. Questions or comments on the plans here? Not yet? Does the puppy have any questions? He's just happy to be there. Yeah.
Yeah, he's wondering why I'm on the computer again after such a long break away from it.
It's like, I don't get it. Yeah, this isn't a very exciting TV show at all. I'm with you, bud, but it is important. We wouldn't be here. So in terms of what could come after, so just to plant the seed, right? If you're thinking to yourself, I just got to get through the semester and I have my requirement and then I never have to think about this again, that's fine. But I told you I'm going to try and convert you to the dark side. So things to think about moving forward from this class. I have a follow-up class that I taught last spring. It'll come back next spring. It's known as Generalized Linear Models. I've applied to make it a formal class, but it's listed as the 7375 generic number. I would highly recommend taking that one next because it focuses on how you predict outcomes that are not just numbers, that are categories or that have skewness or other sorts of things, as well as multivariate analyses, path analysis, where you can look at does X predict this variable, which predicts that variable, and multivariate relationships across outcomes. And then all of these other classes, this course that you're in right now serves as an acceptable prerequisite. So 3 courses that I teach besides that one. I teach the Structural Equation Models course, which is 6249. I also teach 2 different versions of a multi-level models course. I'm teaching longitudinal this semester, which is right after this class, and in the fall I'm teaching the one for clustered data, which we'll talk about in just a second. Design of experiments is a good follow-up to this class as well. That's offered in the fall with Dr. Ariel Aloe. And if you're interested in learning R in more depth, then there is a computer packages course that Dr. LeBeau does, and it focuses entirely on R. And if you're not sure what courses would be useful for you, either as a follow-up or to supplement this training, please ask me, and I'm happy to provide you with whatever guidance. So just to plant the seed that this doesn't have to be the end of the road if you don't want it to be. All right, so changing gears then, a little bit of introductory vocabulary and words to describe what we're going to be learning. So sampling vocabulary. What is the point of research? We're trying to draw conclusions about how the world works. We want to talk about the world, but we don't have the world in any one research study. What we have is a select subsample of the world. So the term in statistics, population, refers to the idea that what we're trying to talk about is the world. Like, what is the general set of individuals or companies or countries or schools or what have you that we're trying to make inferences about, that we want to draw conclusions about. Then we have to decide, how do we represent the world? Because we can't have the whole world. We have to draw a sample. And so we are going to be collecting variables, which are characteristics that vary, that differ across persons in a sample. So our job is to take the information that we get in one sample and to try to use it to make conclusions about the world, the population, even though we only have one sample with which to do it. So let's say, as an example, that we have a researcher who wants to examine graduate student life, and they're going to develop a survey, self-report data collected about program membership, so what department and academic program you're in, your levels of stress, and your overall levels of well-being, right? You've seen surveys like this all about COVID, right? Every 3 minutes, it seems like I get an email in my inbox saying, can you fill out this survey about your experiences with COVID? So yeah, this is a a very timely example. So what type of sampling would be useful to be able to characterize the world given this information? Well, at a minimum, if we want to talk about differences as a function of academic programs, we need more than one kind of program. If we decided to collect data from only one program, then program would be what's known as a constant, not a variable. So a characteristic that varies across the sample we refer to as a variable. A characteristic that does not is a constant. To examine differences between programs, at a minimum, we would want to collect information from different programs within the same college, but we might want to grab different colleges as well to increase our generalizability, or the extent to which the conclusions that we're drawing applies more broadly. In terms of thinking about student life, though, is it sufficient to be able to ask somebody a survey about today or lately, or would it be better to survey them multiple times? So there's a whole host of designs that are becoming more and more popular. They're known as ecological momentary assessments. Have you heard of these before? EMAs. In particular with smartphones, what they do is they put an app on your phone and it buzzes you every now and again, and you input how you're feeling, how well you slept last night, if you've had any fights today, that kind of thing. And it buzzes you often enough that they sort of put together a snapshot of your life through these different momentary assessments. So that type of methodology then gives you maybe a broader view of an individual. You don't ask them how they're doing on a general basis. You try to infer it, for instance, from the common ground across all of their observations. Or do you trust them? Right? So self-report data is only as good as the people willing to give you a true answer. So sometimes people look to not necessarily validate, but to triangulate across sources by asking the same question about other people in a respondent's life, their partners, their friends, their family, teachers of students, parents of students, and that kind of thing. So all of these issues can be generalized into whether we're talking about a sample that is independent versus a sample that is dependent. And this is important in the context of this class because the analyses that we're going to cover this semester are only going to apply to samples that are independent. If you want to learn how to analyze dependent samples, you got to come back to my next classes. So an example of an independent sample would be if we sampled one occasion of measurement from each person, each student, from the same program. So one answer per person for each type of variable. If we did that, program is a constant, not a variable, because everybody's from the same program, which means that program can't predict anything. So we can't use program in the analysis in any way because it's in common, but it does mean that it's controlled for. So we wouldn't have to worry about differences between programs being one of the hidden reasons why we found a particular relationship. Examples of dependent naturally related samples. So dependent is more common. So for instance, if we sampled from a bunch of different programs across the university, and where I'm saying a bunch of would be maybe greater than 20. In that case, we would expect that people from the same program would probably have more in common in the answers that they give us than people from different programs. So the term for that idea is dependency, is the idea that people from the same sampling unit have more in common. And that type of sampling is what's known as clustered sampling or nested sampling. If you want to measure children in school and you recruit children from multiple classrooms in the same school, you would expect that kids from the same classroom have more in common than kids from different classrooms, particularly for academic outcomes where how they're being instructed may matter. That's a clustered sample. Do any of you work with like country survey level data, like PISA or NAEP or any of that kind of stuff? You do? What do you work with? Got to unmute though.
For my second year project, I was working with NLSY, the National Longitudinal Survey of the Youth.
Okay, are those children grouped in schools, families? I'm trying to remember for that one.
Like it's like based on the earlier sample from 1976 that they keep on longitudinally surveying.
Hmm.
I think they're from all around the country.
Okay. So that one actually, I think then if it's the longitudinal aspect would fall under my second bubble, but it's the same type of problem of dependency, not necessarily problem. I would say strategy. Yeah, so data that are longitudinal, where the same information is collected over multiple occasions. The occasions from the same child or parent or what have you are going to be more alike than occasions from different. And so the models have to build that in to be able to anticipate a relationship between people who come from the same whatever or occasions who come from the same person. So these are all examples of dependent samples that we're not going to get to this semester. But the core principles that we are going to do this semester, though, show up in these advanced models. They are a core building block that you would take with you to be able to analyze that type of data. So the longitudinal class is the one that's happening right after that. It'll come back in 2 years, or you could visit it on the YouTube whenever you wish. Repeated measures data. So if you do experiments where everybody responds to the same stimuli, for instance, then observations about the same stimulus are going to have more in common. Observations from the same person are going to have more in common. And also, if you deliberately collect data from pairs, so from partners, spouses, a target person, and some other person like a sibling that's attached to them, that's what's known as dyadic data. And your analysis has to build in the fact that these people come in pairs that are related to each other to be correct. So this is to say we're focusing on independent samples this semester, but everything that you're going to learn will readily apply with some extra stuff to be able to analyze dependent samples. So more specifically, the models that we're working with are what's known as univariate, meaning one variable, meaning they are suited for one outcome per sampling unit. So predicting one outcome per person at a time, as opposed to multivariate, which would be more than one. So if you have dependent samples of these kinds, these are the courses that I would recommend taking. Generalized linear models will get you to dyadic data, repeated measures data. The longitudinal class will get you to what you would need, for instance, in your project with the national study. And clustered multi-level models are people in any kind of group. So clustering is the term for grouping when it occurs because of naturally occurring groups, like kids are in classes. You can't do anything about that. If you have survey respondents, they live somewhere. You can't do anything about that. So the naturally occurring groups thing. So back to this then, we're going to be working with independent samples. We're going to be working with predicting outcomes that are numeric in this class, but there are models for any kind of outcome, just not this semester. And the next piece of this is going to be introducing vocabulary to describe different kinds of variables, and then a little bit about managing data, because I find that that's one of the things that doesn't get taught. And you can save yourself a whole lot of headache in terms of your analyses if you understand what type of data structure the stats programs are going to need as input. So we'll do univariate analysis, describing one variable at a time for the next unit, and we're going to be focusing on how to take a statistic from a sample and try to say something about what it would be in the population to make an inference, as they say. And then continuing with bivariate analyses, which means two variables at a time, just ways of describing whether or not there was a relationship between two different variables as a function of how they are measured, whether they are numbers, categories, or so forth. So types of variables that we're going to be working with. This is a taxonomy that sort of follows levels of measurement if you've had that before, but I approach it from a how would I model them perspective, which is a little bit different. So there are two main overarching kinds of variables that exist in the world in terms of what we'll be working with. One is what I'm going to call categorical variables. And this is where, even though they may be stored in a database as numbers, the numbers are really just labels. So if you answer a question, yes is 1 and no is 0, that's not a number, right? That's just two answers. So if there's only two choices, that is what's known as a binary variable. A synonym for that is the word dichotomous. And so this would be mortality as an outcome in health studies, so whether or not somebody died or not, whether or not you're pregnant or not. There is no such thing as being a little bit pregnant. Even though I can tell you, as you saw, I have an almost 6-year-old, there's a big difference in how one feels at different levels of pregnancy, but you are pregnant the whole time, yes or no, dead or alive. If you have 3 possibilities or more, but they don't have a natural order to them, that's what's known as nominal. So if I asked you, what is the best kind of pet you can have? Now, clearly, the right answer is cat, followed by dog, maybe. And then we get like fish and turtle and all the things that you can't even pet that you still have to clean up their poop. And already I see people shaking their heads like, no. Let me guess, the right answer is dog. Would that be correct instead? No, that's not the answer? Tiffany, what's the right answer?
Cockatiels.
Cockatiels. Did not see that one coming. Okay. Birds. Yeah, I left out birds. Birds were missing data in my fictitious example. But yes, somewhat silly, but my point is made, right? A nominal variable is one in which there is not a natural ordering, or the ordering would be up for debate. It's not natural. There are lots of outcomes and variables that are like this, kinds of things, like what graduate program you're from, right? They are just choices. We can work with those types of variables as predictors. Ordinal is a special case because this one is tricky. Ordinal variables are categories. They're just labels, but there is an ordering. And there is a tendency to want to treat it like a real number, but you shouldn't. So if you respond to what is known as a Likert scale, and by the way, it is Likert, not Likert. That's one of those things where you can have people like roll their eyes at you if you say it wrong. It's Likert because it's a person who has a response format something like this, where 1 is strongly disagree, 2 is disagree, 3 is agree, 4 is strongly agree, right? The numbers don't mean anything, but they are in order. And when I say the numbers don't mean anything, it's not like the differences between them. You can argue, like, is the difference between agree and strongly agree as big as the difference between disagree and agree? You can just say they're ordered. And so to make that point, I note that these values, if this is how they were coded, are equally correct because order is all that matters. And so an ordinal variable is a categorical variable where you kind of want to treat the numbers as numbers, but you probably shouldn't. Synonyms for this type of information. You will hear grouping variable, a discrete variable, a classification variable. In R, these are known as factor variables. All of those words mean the same thing. They are referring to a piece of information where it really is kinds, not amounts. Numbers are used to store the kinds, but the numbers really are just labels for the different kinds. So that's one type of variable that we're working with as predictors in this case. The other is when numbers are numbers. So the term that I'm going to use for this is quantitative, numeric. And within this category, there are subcategories that deal with the range that the numbers can take. So one subcategory is when the numbers are numbers, meaning that there is interval measurement, but the numbers have some sort of natural boundary that limits what they could possibly be. So a binomial variable is one example where there is a lower end and there is an upper end. So if I give you a test where it's number correct, the worst you could do is none, and the most you could do is however many questions you have on the exam. If you convert this into a proportion or percent correct, then it's bounded between either 0 and 1 or 0 and 100, depending on how you scale it, but it's still the same endpoints. Another example of this is what's known as a count variable. So the number of times that something has happened. Like I can ask you, how many cigarettes have you smoked today? The lowest possible answer that anyone could give is 0. You can't smoke -2 cigarettes. It's not a thing. But the maximum is infinity, right? How many cigarettes can you smoke in a day? I don't want to find out, but I suspect the answer is not good. So that's a variable that has a boundary on one side but not the other. There are special cases of count variables that you may come across this terminology. There is 0 truncated, in which case the lowest is 1. So for instance, if you're working with a hospital database and you want to look at something like outcomes for patients based on the number of days they spent in the hospital or the number of treatments they received, something like that. In order to be in the database, you have to have been in the hospital for at least one time. And so if we had a count for the number of times you've been there or the length of the stay, the bottom would be 1, not 0. So that's what's known as 0 truncated. A different problem is what's known as 0 inflated, which is where you have too many zeros. So that can happen whenever you are sampling 2 different kinds of people, but you're asking them for numeric information. So if I did that ecological momentary assessment thing on my phone here, beep, beep, tell me how many cigarettes you've smoked since the last time I beeped you. Well, as a non-smoker, I'd be like, 0. Yeah, still 0. Yeah, still 0. Quit asking me this. And then there's other people who would have an answer. So if you look at the distribution of that variable, you would have a huge pile of zeros. That would include people who never smoke, period, and people who haven't gotten around to smoking today. And then you'd have some sort of number after it that's a distribution. And so, believe it or not, each of these types of variables that are numbers with boundaries, there are models for that. So stats is like technologies, like there's an app for that. There is a distribution for that. There is a model for that. One of the unfortunate dogmatic practices that is still around in Introstat is a misconception that all variables have to be normally distributed. So those of you who've had stats before will recognize that term as referring to like a bell curve, something that's symmetric and continuous. That is not true. The outcomes that are supposed to be normally distributed are one type of model, but there's all different other kinds of models out there that are built simply for situations like this. So if your research deals regularly with either categorical variables or variables that are never going to be normal no matter what, no worries. You can learn how to analyze them. You'll just have to take more coursework than what we can do this semester. And then the other family is continuous and unbounded. So in this case, it's pretty rare to find that in practice, where you have a number that is unbounded, that actually ranges from negative to positive infinity. But that's okay, because we in most cases, we can work with it, even if there is a boundary. So the models that we're going to learn in this case are pretending like the variables are in this category, that they truly are continuous and unbounded, but it just has to be plausibly that way. And so the word that I have coined to describe variables that we're going to pretend are really continuous but aren't actually is continue-ish. That's my word for this. It's like, it's not really, but we're going to pretend like it is. So there's a couple examples on here. A scale score. So if you have an item where there's 4 possible responses, we call that ordinal. But if you sum 10 items that are each scored that way, then all of a sudden you have a scale and we call that interval. What? No, it's not really. It's continue-ish because it does have a boundary. It doesn't have decimals. It's only integers. But we're going to pretend like it's interval and truly continuous. Same thing would happen with a mean instead of a sum. Other ones here you may see things like response time. That's actually truly continuous to the level of precision of whatever you're measuring. You can get down to milliseconds, heart rates, things like that, but they do have a natural lower boundary. But if you've collected your data far enough away from zero, then you're probably not going to hit it. And also latent trait scores. So if any of you have had training in measurement, then those types of scores that come from latent trait models would fit into this category as well. And then ratio is the last one, which, to be fair, my husband made me put in this slide when he looked at this lecture. He's like, you forgot ratio. And I'm like, they are never going to see a ratio variable ever. But here it is. Ratio is when zero really means zero, like temperature, shit like that. We don't have those kinds of variables in the social sciences, but you can think of them as just numbers. So, all right. So, wrapping up for today, then, since we're out of time. Don't be afraid. This course is not going to make you fail your life. I promise you, it's going to be fine. You can ask folks who've been through it. There's been a number of folks, 23 last semester and then several from last year. Let me know whenever you need help. And I think that's enough. And we'll review the rest of it on Thursday. So any questions before we adjourn for today?
Lisa, I did have one question just related to the timeline of the readings.
Mhm.
So like if we find those helpful, is that like a suggested that we read those before that day, or it's like you read those after that day? Does that make sense?
Yes. Thank you for asking. I forgot to mention that. My strategy is just to put all of the readings that go with each unit into the box where the unit sort of starts. So I have like lecture 1 and example 1, and then 2, and then 3. I think that they may go better after, actually, than before. Like I want the first pass at it, and then the readings can help to sort of maybe fill in some details or cement the stuff. But I don't expect you to have read all of the stuff before that one class. It's just those are the readings that go with those set of ideas.
All right. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. All right. Anyone else? All right, then thank you for coming. I hope to see you all Thursday. Take care of yourselves. Let me know if you need anything.